Once again, good morning. Welcome to Mosaic Church. I'm Alex. I'm a ministry intern here at Mosaic, and we're continuing our series this morning called Faithful Through Generations. And we're looking at these stories in Genesis that show how God is continually faithful throughout all the generations of all his people. And we're going to be continuing that today by looking at a story that involves a bit of sibling rivalry, as Karen just read for us. So, to start things off, can I get a show of hands? Who here has a sibling, or perhaps multiple? A lot of people. And who here has had some sort of tension or rivalry or some kind of argument or fight with their sibling? It's about the same number of hands. That's what I expected. Yeah. And if you haven't had that, I'm sure that at some point you've had this dynamic with someone where things just get tense sometimes. Maybe you're jealous of something they have or the way that people treat them, that you feel like you should be treated the same way and you're not, and it's just annoying, and you just go back and forth with them, and you're just bitter toward them. Now imagine that starts in the womb, because that's what happens with Jacob and Esau here. So this goes deep, and it continues deep into their lives. Now we're only looking at one part of the story here today, but um, that's kind of the tension that we're going to be seeing. And so we have the story of Jacob and Esau. If you were here last week, John introduced us to them and kind of their backstory. I'm going to quickly run back over some of that just to make sure that we all have the scene set, especially if you weren't here last week or something like that, and talk about just a few implications from that before we dive into the story that we're really going to be getting into. So with that, if you want to follow along, we'll be in Genesis chapter 25, and I'm going to start reading in verse 19. So with that, let me go ahead and begin. It says, "This is the account of Abraham's son Isaac. Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel the Aramean from Paddan Aram, and sister of Laban the Aramean. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. The babies jostled each other within her, and she said, 'Why is this happening to me?' So she went to inquire of the Lord. The Lord said to her, 'Two nations are in your womb, and two people from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger.' When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. The first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment. So they named him Esau. After this, his brother came out with his hand grasping Esau's heel, so he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old, and Rebekah gave birth to them." Okay, that's a lot of text, but like I said, we're going to just kind of move through this relatively quickly because it was covered last week. But I do want to pull out a few things from this. So first we see that Isaac and Rebekah here, they're Jacob and Esau's parents, and they have this same hardship that Isaac's parents went through, which is this the struggle of infertility, this barrenness. And while they didn't have it quite as difficult in that way as Abraham and Sarah did, 20 years is still a long time to wait. And that can be difficult for any couple, but it's especially difficult in their culture where having children was central to strength and your legacy and the display of having some sort of blessing from God. And so this was really difficult for them. But we see that God comes through. And when Isaac prays to him, God is faithful to fulfill his promise that he gave to Abraham first, that he will become a father of many nations. And in fact, we see that those many nations are beginning right now because there are two of those nations in Rebekah's womb. And so this pregnancy is really difficult too. But again, we see God fulfilling his promises even in the midst of this difficult time for them. And then we get to the birth of these boys. The older one is Esau, and then Jacob comes literally grasping his heel, so not too long after. And this name, Jacob, it comes from meaning like grasping the heel. He grasps the heel. And this is a Hebrew phrase that means something like he deceives or a deceiver, which we'll see at points in his story becomes very true of him. And so right from the very moment, we see Jacob trying to undermine his older brother Esau. And when I say undermine, in part that's because of, again, in their culture, they have this, if you want the fancy term for it, this concept of primogeniture, this concept of the oldest son being given some sort of authority, a level of status just by being the firstborn. And he's given this birthright, this greater inheritance through this status. But we're going to see that gets complicated in the story. And right from their birth, we see that tension begin. In all these things, we see a difficult life for Isaac and Rebekah. And their twin boys haven't even reached their terrible twos yet. But we also see God faithfully fulfilling his promises through them. And what's interesting is that I talked about how having children was so important in their culture. Like literally, if we look at verse 19, it says, this is the account of Abraham's son Isaac. And then it skips ahead 40 years to when he gets married. And then it skips ahead 20 years to when they're finally having children. Like the important part of Isaac is his children, is his kin. That's the important part of the story to tell. And that can be difficult for us to grasp because we live in this very hyper-individualistic culture, but they didn't. They knew the way they thought of themselves was as part of the family unit. That was a very integral part of who they were. And we'll come back to that concept a little bit later, but I just kind of want to set the scene of all these things as we look into now the next part of the story. And so through all of this, we can see the beginnings of our theme for today, which is that God uses broken people to redeem broken people. So we're going to see in just a second here that Isaac and Rebekah, they are broken people. And yet they're used in God's redemptive plan to eventually, this line leads to Jesus, who ultimately came to redeem us. And we'll see that in the lives of Jacob and Esau as well. So with all of that set up out of the way, we can get into our main text for the day. We're going to be back in Genesis 25. I'm going to start with verse 27. It says, the boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was a quiet man, staying among the tents. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. That's not good. It's wild to me because there's literally we have a phrase that's like, oh, that'd be like choosing my favorite child. Like it's supposed to be this impossible task. And yet here, and if you know the story of Isaac and Rebekah, this is literally a match made in heaven. Like God made this marriage happen. And here they are, they can't even agree on which of their children they like the most. They are broken people. We don't have to look very hard to see that. I'm going to kick that over. So here's some broken people, and yet they are God's means to redeeming the world. It's incredible. And this is the first look that we see of Jacob and Esau after their births, and it's not an exactly wholesome tale either. These two are equally broken. So first we have the firstborn, Esau. We have this kid that was born hairy, whatever that's worth. He's a man of the open country. He's a skillful hunter. So I guess he's not afraid to go and be nomadic and just go live off the land. And then we have the younger brother, Jacob, who is a quiet man living among the tents, which is also a kind of a strange phrase, I think, at least for me. Apparently, this term for like a quiet man, it's often used to describe someone of decent character, which is ironic considering what we see in the story. That's not what he displays at all. But he is more content to be, at home, kind of a homebody. And so Isaac, who loves the taste of wild game, he loves the son that brings that wild game home to him, which again, terrible. That's not the way that we should be. Well, we shouldn't be favoring our children at all. And yet he likes one son just because of the food that he brings home. And then Rebekah loves Jacob more. Also terrible, I guess because he was around more. I don't know, but it's not a good look, and yet here are these people that God is using in his plan. So we have these two, Jacob and Esau. Let's read on. Verse 29. Once, when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country, famished. He said to Jacob, "Quick, let me have some of that red stew. I'm famished." That is why it was also called Edom. Okay, quick pause there. This word Edom apparently means red. And it's interesting because we already had in his birth story, we were told about this red complexion that he has. And we're told that that's why he's called Esau. And as far as I could tell, it seems like there's disagreement about whether we even know what Esau means. But we have more understanding of the word Edom. And it's interesting to me that this red stew is what gives him that name as opposed to, his complexion. And I think that this demonstrates for us that this is a very important story. It's very important in their lives, and it's very important in the future. Because if you fast forward, we see the nation of Israel, God's chosen people, his holy nation, and Israel, the other name for Jacob. They're enemies of the nation of Edom. And so indeed, we see that tension, that sibling rivalry, grow into something greater. So we have Esau, he's hungry, and he essentially says the equivalent of like, dude, I'm starving, give me some of that stuff. I need to eat it. So how does Jacob respond? Verse 31, Jacob replied, "First, sell me your birthright." How's that for brotherly love? I don't know. It's like these people are wild, and I know that, and we're gonna talk about this later. Like I'm no different a lot of the time, but in this moment, I'm like, what? Come on, that's ridiculous, right? But here's his hungry brother. He's weak, and he just wants something to eat. Jacob has something to eat right there, and he says, "Yeah, sure, sure, I'll give you some food. Just give me your inheritance, and we'll call it even." That's not an even trade. Like it's tipping the scales way out of whack. And so what's amazing here is we think about Jacob. He comes from Isaac, who comes from Abraham. Abraham showed great hospitality to strangers, to the foreigner. Jacob won't even show that to his brother. He's clearly a broken person. And here he is trying to extort his brother Esau. But Esau, he's hungry. And so how does he respond in that moment? He says, "Look, I am about to die," Esau said. "What good is the birthright to me?" At first glance, I think that sounds somewhat reasonable. Like, if you die, then you don't get your inheritance anyway, right? But I think it's safe to say that he's being a bit dramatic here. He's exaggerating. And why can I so confidently say that? Well, he made it home, right? He was out in the open field and he made it home. So clearly he had enough strength to at least do that. Now, again, Jacob is clearly in the wrong here. But Esau, he's being foolish too. He's not valuing this birthright. So what is that birthright? We don't know exactly. We have definitely some clues. We know, for one, it's different than the father's blessing because there's another argument and a lot of deception that happens with that. But this birthright, we know that in later years in the nation of Israel, in Mosaic law, that birthright is a double portion. They get basically double the size of the inheritance as the rest of their brothers for being the firstborn. It could be that that's what this is, but regardless, wherever this birthright is, it's a level of inheritance. It's some amount of future land and possessions. And Esau is looking at that and saying, "I don't care. Like I just want to eat." He's not giving the kind of attention to that birthright that he should. He's not valuing it the way he should. And so he's making this impulsive decisions over a small indulgence. And we're going to unpack that a little bit more, but first I want to go ahead and just finish out the story to see how it plays out. So verse 33, but Jacob said, "Swear to me first." He's going to extort his brother. He might as well do it right. Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. And Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. He ate and drank and then got up and left. So Esau despised his birthright. Goes down exactly as they agreed. Esau got his food, and then he left. So, again, these two become essentially the father of these great nations. So, which nation would you rather be a part of? The one who extorts their brother, or the one who makes impulsive decisions and completely throws away all of their future potential? It's a tough choice, I know. Like they're both so great. How can I pick one? No, they're not. They're not great. But these are two great nations because, again, our theme for today: God uses broken people to redeem broken people. And this is the beginning of that reversal that we see in God's kingdom. He does not give anything to us based on our order of birth. He doesn't give anything to us based on our merit, which is clear because here there's no merit earning anything in this story. Um, God does not work the way that we do. And he doesn't hand out things the way that we expect might be fair. He gives it all by grace because we haven't earned any of it. And so we have two broken people in the story. We're going to dive deeper. We're going to zoom into Esau, and then we're going to zoom into Jacob, and we're going to see how between those two stories, we can see not just in this, but in our own lives, how God uses broken people to redeem broken people. So first, let's look at Esau. Again, he is the older brother, so he has a level of status with that. He's favored by his father, which is pretty great for him. He's got a lot going for him in that way because also in that culture, like the men just had a lot more status, a lot more power, a whole lot more than women. And a lot of things we talk about in these stories, they are in here because they are descriptive. They are what happened. They're not prescriptive, right? We're not meant to follow these examples. Okay, and we've seen that already, and that continues to be true here. But he's his dad's favorite. He's got this firstborn. He's got this inheritance going for him. But he sees some red stuff, and that's what he wants. So he doesn't care about anything else. He's just tunnel vision, singularly focused on what that indulgence can give him. And he's willing to give basically all his future up for that. That's foolish. That's wicked. That's us. So often we have these things that we see and we want and we think like I deserve that and like I can't live without this. And we give up something greater for it. We've each had moments like that. We let our eyes linger where we shouldn't, or we let a little annoying moment with someone fester into bitterness and hatred against them. Or we let our stomachs guide our decision making. There's a passage in Philippians where Paul, he's talking about how our citizenship for those who are in Christ, our citizenship is in heaven. But before that, he talks about those who reject Christ. He says their destiny is destruction. Their God is their stomach, and their glory is in their shame. Their mind is on earthly things. And that might sound funny because it's like destiny destruction, like that's really big. And then next he says their God is their stomach, and it's like, well, that's more confusing. But honestly, like there are times when I feel that when I have some kind of craving, I just want to indulge in that. And that's not to say that the next time you're craving ice cream, it's necessarily sinful to eat ice cream. I'm not telling you that. Ice cream's great. But at the end of the day, what is it that's guiding you to make these decisions? And it doesn't necessarily have to be food, right? It can be a lot of things. It can be our insecurities. It can be lust. It can be our pride. What is it that's really driving our decisions? And is it just to get an indulgence? Just for one small moment of pleasure? Because when we do that, we're giving up something greater. We're giving up the immense amount of joy that there is in knowing God and in following Him. And sometimes that's just harder to see and we miss it. So instead we trade away the finest meal in the world for this piece of like mediocre chocolate that's already been bitten off of. It's not a good trade for us, and yet we do it. Um, what do we let guide us? When we do it, to an extent, it works, right? We see Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. He ate and drank and got up and left. He got what he wanted, and it was probably pretty good. I'm sure he enjoyed himself while eating it, and he got everything out of it that he could have. But there was so much more for him in that birthright that he gave up for it. He got something, but not nearly enough to replace what he gave up. And then we see the result. So Esau despised his birthright. And that word for despise, essentially what it means is he undervalued it. He didn't care for it the way he was meant to. It can range from like just meaning simple neglect to something more like actual hatred for it. That word, but regardless, he didn't see it. He didn't have like a clear vision. He wasn't seeing with clear eyes. He saw what was directly in front of him and ignored the consequences. When we go against God's commands, that is what we're doing. We look for that sliver of pleasure from an indulgence and ignore the immense, unending joy that it robs us from. But again, our theme today is that God uses broken people to redeem broken people. So if we are like Esau and we are broken, what is that redemption? What is the hope for us? We can't trade away our inheritance. We can't lose it. We didn't earn it by being the firstborn. We didn't earn it by anything, any of our merits. We didn't earn it by anything we did. It was given to us freely by God's grace. And so that inheritance that we have, we can't trade it for a bowl of stew. And so when we indulge ourselves, it's bad, and we are robbing ourselves of joy. But we're not losing God's grace. It's greater than that. And so we can see the broken person of Esau and how we are broken like him. But we know that our inheritance is better. So what about the rest of this? Using broken people to redeem broken people. Like, I see that I'm a broken person. That's clear. I got that covered. But what about this redemption part? Like, we talked about kind of what it is, but how does he use me in that story? Let's look at Jacob. Jacob, the one who extorts his brother. He's broken. But he seems to be rewarded. Like, he gets something out of this. He saw something he wanted. He took advantage of someone to get it, and he got it. What do we do with that? What we can see here is that God is accomplishing his purposes through a broken person. Jacob is not being rewarded for his wicked behavior. God is acting through it. God said before they were even born that the older will serve the younger. And this is the beginning of seeing that happen. It's this reversal that we see so often throughout the story of redemption, of things don't work in God's kingdom the way they work in a human way. And so we can see basically two things through this story about the way that we play into God's redemption plan. So first, we can see that God is powerful to redeem even the most broken of people. There is nobody here in this room beyond God's saving power. There's nobody watching online. There's nobody in the world beyond his redemptive power. He can use Jacob, who, again, has these examples of great hospitality shown to him, and instead he extorts his brother and won't even give him a bowl of soup. Jacob, the one who we'll see goes on to do more deceptive, wicked things. He is the one whom the nation of God is named after. God can use anyone. And so though we're broken, God uses us in his story. And how does he use us? Well, the second thing that we can see in this is that no matter how broken we are, we can contribute toward that mission. Jacob is in the wrong here, but God uses that to accomplish his purposes. And again, he becomes that nation through which eventually, after a long time of waiting, and a long time of more wickedness and running from God and turning from God, eventually he becomes the one through whom Jesus comes. Jesus the Redeemer, the one who saves us from all of our wickedness and all of our shame, and the one who wipes away all the times that we trade complete joy for a simple indulgence. And so we see through this story that God uses broken people like us to redeem broken people like us. No matter how broken we are, we can be redeemed. And no matter how broken we are, we can play a part in that story. Jesus tells his disciples, this is one of the most well-known passages. Jesus tells his disciples to go and make disciples of all nations. Those disciples were broken people. We can see that in the story. We can see times where they lacked faith. We can see times where they actively disobeyed, where they were fighting for status, and Jesus told them again and again not to do that, and yet they kept doing it. They were broken people, and yet they were the ones through whom the ones that Jesus told to go and make more disciples. Though they were broken, and though we are broken, we get to be a part of that mission, and that's amazing. Right? The best thing that we can have is that redemption, and the best thing that we can offer other people is that redemption. And so the fact that though we're broken, we get to be parts of that we get to play a role in that we get to be a part of God's story of redemption, that's amazing. And we can see that even in this broken story here. We can see God using broken people like Jacob and Esau, like you and me. God uses broken people to redeem broken people. And it's only by his grace that we get that redemption. We can't earn it. We don't have it by our birthright. He gives it to us freely, and we cannot sell it away. And so in those moments when we're displaying our brokenness the most, I pray that we would remember that God is better, and that there's more joy in following him than whatever little amount of pleasure we can get from those cravings we have. I pray that we remember that we get to be parts of God's redemptive story, that we're members of his family, that this individualistic idea that I talked about before, that we are part of something greater than ourselves, that we are part of God's family. And so when we think of ourselves, how do we think of ourselves? Is it just as this broken person, or is it a redeemed member of the body of Christ? God uses broken people to redeem broken people, and we get to be a part of that. Let's pray. God, thank you for your grace. Thank you that you just offer freely the kind of inheritance that we could never earn, the kind of inheritance that we are so ready to give away like Esau. God, I pray that you would help all of us to remember just how great that inheritance is, and that we would live to be a part of that mission where others could take part in it as well. Because when others join in, we don't lose any part of our inheritance. We just get the joy of seeing them participate with us. God, help us to remember that though we are broken, you redeem us, no matter how lost we might be. Thank you for your grace, Lord. In your name we pray. Amen.